taking responsibility, one of our core values, right? So each of us owning our part. So if there's something that has gone awry, we start with ourselves.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. It's Wednesday afternoon, actually the Wednesday after Valentine's Day. I hope all of you were able to celebrate Valentine's Day in your own way. Janice and I had a great time and went downtown on a trip and just enjoyed ourselves, and that's great. Always good to get a break from the daily grind of business. Thank you for all of you who are subscribing. Our subscribership is really going up. Has been going up a lot in the last 3 or 4 months, so I appreciate it. And so please tell your friends, families, even tell your enemies about the podcast, and tell them to hit the subscribe button and the like button, and please spread the word. Also, my usual shameless plug, I have 2 books out right now. The Art of Ronin Leadership, which is my first book, more of a macro version of kind of my philosophy on leadership, and then The Art of Executing Ronin Leadership Strategies, which came about after feedback from people saying they liked the first book, but they wanted some more kind of hands-on stuff. And yeah, I can see our guest has a copy, so that's wonderful. So without further ado, I'm really excited about this podcast, and I told all of you before in some previous podcasts, we've got some really top talent lined up. And this is one of the top talents that I've met. Janice and I have met since we came into the Valley. Jonathan Ullman is the CEO of the Mob Museum. For those of you who are not from this area or haven't heard of the Mob Museum, it is a wonderful place to visit. The history of sort of gangsters and mobs, and also a lot of the history of the Las Vegas. And they've got some wonderful hands-on exhibits that Jonathan will be able to tell you about, but it's really great for the community. We were able to actually take some kids there from a charitable organization a couple weeks ago, and that was great. Thank you, Jonathan, for setting that up. But without further ado, I'd just like to welcome you to our podcast, Jonathan.
Mike, thanks so much. It's an honor to be here with you.
Great. So, for those uninitiated with the Mob Museum, can you tell us a little bit about the Mob Museum, kind of its history and what its purpose is all about?
Sure. Yeah. So Mob Museum, we're located in downtown Las Vegas. Yesterday was actually our 11th anniversary. So we opened February 14th of 2012. We've been going strong ever since. It's really been a wonderful, wonderful journey.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we celebrated with, as we always do on our anniversary, we did a free day for locals. We're very, very community oriented at the museum. Right. So the mission of the museum is to advance the public understanding of organized crime's history and impact on American society. So it's a pretty broad mission. When you visit, you see that we occupy the former U.S. Post Office and Federal Courthouse that first opened in 1933 in downtown Las Vegas. So it's a building that's on the National Registry of Historic Places. Okay. It's historic for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, people for people that might be listening from other parts of the country, 1933 doesn't necessarily sound old, but it is an old building by Las Vegas standards. So Las Vegas, you have to keep in mind, is the largest city that was born in the 20th century. At the time that this building opened, the population of Las Vegas was only about 5,000 people. So it was the first building that all federal agencies would have been housed under at that time. So it starts off with the post office, the courthouse, but pretty much every, the folks that came and built Nellis Air Force Base stayed at the building. The first agents for the FBI before there was a field office were in that building. Wow. And it's historic in part for its architecture. Las Vegas doesn't have a great track record of maintaining its historic structures. So you don't get better examples of kind of Depression era neoclassical architecture than our building. But beyond that, it's also historic for the events that took place in the courtroom. In particular, it was one of the locations of the Kefauver committee hearings. So these were a series of U.S. Senate investigative hearings into organized crime and interstate commerce. So they took place in 1950, 1951. They were kind of known as the Kefauver committee hearings because of the senator from Tennessee, Estes Kefauver, who was the committee chair. And they went around the country, 14 different cities around the country, and they were really extraordinary on a number of different levels. I mean, one, just raising awareness about how insidious organized crime was. But also, while doing that, these were the first hearings that were ever televised. And it was such a national phenomenon, that people would, businesses would close and schools would shut down and people would gather where they could to watch what happened. So that's the reason for the building being historic. We created this museum in part because then mayor. So if you go back to the early aughts, then mayor Oscar Goodman, who is still on our board, and we kind of regard him as our chief visionary. He, as mayor, realized that this building was no longer being utilized, or not very much. I mean, they were still doing things, so around. They were still doing things like naturalization ceremonies, that sort of things. But most of the larger federal cases were being handled in more modern courthouses up the road. And that the city came to recognize that the building could be acquired from the federal government, but it came with two deed covenants. So one, it had to be rehabilitated, and two, it had to be repurposed for a cultural use. So the question was, what type of cultural use, or in other words, what type of museum would make the most sense? So thinking about Las Vegas history, as well as important stories that really aren't told nationally. And so we go by, so as much as we, our name is the Ma Museum, our descriptor is the National Museum of Organized Crime and Law Enforcement, because we tell the story with a specific focus on Las Vegas, but much more broadly of how organized crime has come to develop across the country and even internationally from the turn of the 20th century to present day. So if you come to the museum, you take a journey that starts turn of the 20th century, and you see, all sorts of, exhibits that take you back to, it's very much an immigration story. It's people coming to America and how organized crime takes root. But then you go and you see the different types of criminal enterprises that occur, and then what the law enforcement response is. So all the things, all the kind of innovative ways in which law enforcement has responded to that. And I should say the criminal justice system, because it could be both about law enforcement pursuing organized crime, but also, what types of, changes to law, legislative measures have been put in place to stop organized crime. And the exhibits are really, they're really amazing, Mike. I mean, I know you got a chance to see, there's some incredible artifacts. Yesterday was Valentine's Day. We have the wall from the famous, notorious St. Valentine's Day massacre in Chicago, along with all the ballistics evidence from that crime. There's multimedia, a lot of original video. There are objects that tie back to the Prohibition era. There's, you can use interactives where you can listen to wiretap recordings that undercover agents took that were used to prosecute criminals. There are some very interactive spaces. We have in the more contemporary crime and law enforcement area, we have a crime lab where you can understand different types of forensic science topics and try your hands at fingerprint analysis or ballistics testing, and then there's also going back to the Prohibition era, there's a whole speakeasy environment. We call it the underground, and we tell all of the kind of cultural stories of the Prohibition era. So it's organized crime and law enforcement, but it's also the politics of the day, how businesses responded to Prohibition and what people were doing. So the birth of the jazz era, the Harlem Renaissance, the fashion flapper culture, and it's just such a wonderful, rich environment. So there's all sorts of things that people can do at the museum. I mean, it's really a tremendous experience.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is. I've been there not 3 or 4 times now, and you're always learning something new, always finding out something new. Of course, I'm partial to the speakeasy, but I love that. I love that whole vibe. Also, you were talking about interactive, so the crime lab, but talk about that other interactive piece you have there with sort of pretending like you're a police officer in certain scenarios.
Yeah, so we're really fortunate to have this. We work very closely with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, as well as the UNLV Criminal Justice Department and other subject matter experts to design this space. And I have to mention, it's also sponsored generously by the Stanley W. Ekstrom Foundation. This space is all about use of force. So we talk about, in the exhibits that surround the interactive, we talk about how the law defines force and what's excessive force. We talk about how how police department policies will define use of force and what is excessive force. The concept of a use of force continuum. So, but then more progressively, so the use of force continuum is largely, this as well as anyone, Mike. I mean, it's basically a person behaves in a particular way, and depending upon how they're behaving, an officer is justified to use a corresponding level of force if necessary. We also know that more progressively, police departments, and Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is really at the forefront of this sort of thing, train their officers in de-escalation techniques. And it's really, this whole space is really designed to look at how the best police departments, and we believe that Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is a standard bearer in that regard.
Right.
How they train their officers to respond, both before, during, and after incidents of use of force, because it's about how do you actually engage with a person? It's other types of policies and procedures, like the use of body cameras, and as we see in a lot of situations, the difference between whether or not communities will trust the police department largely surrounds transparency. So how well and again, Metro is really really great about this. When something happens, getting out there quickly and communicating with the press and members of the community about what transpired and sharing that information. So what we try to do in this area is a person can go through the interactive. It's a firearm training simulator. You get a duty belt. You get a firearm that has, it's got a CO2 cartridge, so it feels real. It's got a laser sight on it. You get paired up with a staff member who's a training officer, and you get to walk in the shoes of an officer in training and try to, understand what these situations are like. So you actually get greeted by Metro personnel, and so one of your former guests, Sasha Larkin, is in that video. We thought it very important. This is it is not designed to be a game. It's not something where this is a serious experience where and I think we convey really the gravitas of there is no more important decision that a law enforcement officer makes than the choice between whether or not to use potentially deadly force. So you then go through a series of rooms. The first two rooms are these digital shoot, don't shoot scenarios. And then the last room is basically a live action role play. So this is reality-based training. And again, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is really, at the forefront of doing this reality-based training, because as we all know, it's one thing to interact with a video screen and just make a kind of the binary shoot, don't shoot decision. It's something very different when you walk into a space and you have somebody who is in role, in character. So you've been told, for example, that when you go into this room, you're actually going into a parking lot. You're responding to a call of a suspicious character, and you go into this space and you see a person, and now you got to talk to them to figure out what's going on. It's not, it's not all clear cut, and you got to use your voice to really, to try to de-escalate the situation and come to a resolution. And this is one of, if not the highest rated area in the entire museum. I mean, we have people that come out of it, feeling just kind of amazed by the experience, and, having such a deeper kind of respect for the challenge of that a law enforcement officer faces in these situations. And really, the biggest takeaway, how important training is.
Yeah. No, I agree. Especially if you think about it in today's environment with, everything going on with law enforcement being scrutinized, having something like this and having citizens be able to go through. I remember Janice went through a great experience, right? To just be able to see what they have to go through. So I really wanted you to describe and talk about that. And those of you who end up going to the Mob Museum, you definitely have to check out this particular one, because it's so relevant, to what's going on today. I want to take a step back. So you mentioned about, Mayor Goodman being this visionary. How did you get involved with the Mob Museum? I mean, I understand you've been CEO since the impetus of this thing. All right. So how did that happen?
Well, so I applied for a job. I guess going back, I came to Las Vegas for this job. So my wife Joanne, our family, we were living on the East Coast. We were in central New York at the time, and before that, New Jersey. And my whole career has been in museums. In fact, I just last month, it's my 30th year. It's almost hard to believe that I've been in working in museums. Wow. So I was looking for an opportunity, and just saw an ad in the paper for this position. And so I came out to be the first hire. So
hold on for a second. I just need to pause because Janice's on the phone. I got to have her moved and stuff like that. I'm going to pause. Sorry about that.
No.
So you just continue. You just continue on. We'll just edit it. So yeah.
Yeah. So I was not from Las Vegas. I was not, I was always interested in the subject matter for sure, but that was not my background. My background was in museums and museum management, museum leadership. So I was hired to be the first employee. The project was already underway. Okay. So at the time, the city was overseeing, so the city kind of was the kind of catalyst for starting this project. And they technically owned the building. So we're in a 99-year lease of the building. But they had I think we're bringing to the table all the resources necessary to create this museum, but also had the foresight to know that it should be operated by a private group. So the city sets up an advisory board to kind of start to guide the development of the project. And then that advisory board morphs into a board of directors. So 2007, they incorporate. The city is still overseeing really all of the funding and the resources for rehabilitating the building and building out the exhibits. So you can kind of think of it as kind of this slow passing of the baton from the city to the private nonprofit. So at the time I joined, it was far enough along that that the exhibit developers had been contracted, the construction group was, the rehabilitation was underway, but they were starting to think about, well, we need an organization to actually run this endeavor. So I was brought out to create the organization effectively. I mean, which not like, again, there's tremendous, people involved in support around. I mean, amazing board, amazing resources at the city, but at the end of the day, you need staff to actually, market it, figure it out, how you're going to open and, open the doors every day, and how you're going to, continue to, these things are never just created and done. They're ongoing, always works in progress. So that was really the focus of what I was supposed to do.
Right. So, yeah, and that's great. So from a leadership perspective, you're brought in, and things are happening already. But obviously, your job is to think very strategically about where this is going to go, or how you want to see it run. And a big part of that is being able to hire top talent. So how do you go about looking for top talent? What are some of your criteria that you look for?
Well, I'll tell you a few things about it, Mike, because it's, you're right. I mean, it is, the job is strategic and it's long-term. It's also was pretty granular. My first day, I showed up, I went to Best Buy to get my computer and my phone, and, and then went to a Starbucks to figure out how, start working on a plan, right? It's, there was no roadmap for it, and really nothing. I mean, which is great. I mean, it's exciting and it's full of all kinds of possibilities, but it's also, it can also be daunting. And, to your question, it's, you have to set, I think it's both being very strategic and very tactical, right? From a strategic perspective, kind of understanding, making certain that you have the right kind of understanding or best assumptions about how large is this organization going to be, what kind of budget are we going to be operating at. These are the things that kind of put you, start to kind of create the parameters, around what types of individuals, skills, experience, compensation levels are we going to be able to, create these positions around. How large will the organization be? All those sorts of things are going to dictate, what types of, skill sets you need in the team that you bring in, as well as what your wherewithal is going to be. You're not going to, if you might want to recruit at a certain level, but that may require resources that you don't necessarily have. So trying to understand those things, but then also be able to articulate the right vision for the organization that's going to make people really feel excited about, anytime that you're attracting talent. I mean, this as much as anybody, it's a two-way street. I mean, it's not just, you as the employer, you're not holding all the cards and just, you have to, make certain that there's an alignment between what types of individuals, not everybody is a fit for every organization, right? So what is this organization? What is the nature of the work and the way in which we're going to be doing that work that makes it resonate with certain types of individuals? So, sitting down and clarifying what our mission is, making certain that we have a clear mission statement and, an understanding of what those strategic goals are, defining our core values, right? I mean, there's there are fundamental values that we should be employing in any organization, but then there's also the values, like what is it that makes our organization distinctive? And again, help, these are, and it's, I mean, this is such a rich topic. I mean, it's, these things are never etched in stone, and, the values are all at once kind of a reflection of how the organization is and what it aspires to be. So,
right. Yep.
How do people that you're trying to attract to the organization fit in that, to that, and are we the right match? So getting those right reference points. Mission, vision, values, strategic goals, timeline, kind of parameters for what's the size and scope of what we're doing, and then getting into the details too. I mean, the first couple of people we hired, I can remember, hiring. First I hired someone that was really just going to be kind of a Swiss Army knife assistant kind of person, and then the next hire was a marketing professional. You can only hire so many people with, trust me, we're going to have good benefits. Right. At some point, actually have to go get a, define what your benefits are. When are, how much PTO are people going to get? What's your health plan going to be? Like, there's like, you can't not attend to the details. I mean, those details are very important to people, and, as they should be. I mean, so there's a little bit of, in the early days, it's very much a startup, and there's a lot of toggling between these kind of grander, longer term vision types of things, but then also getting down into the weeds. I mean,
you have to when you're creating something out of whole cloth, right? I mean, it's the nature of the job. So from the time that you started this endeavor, how long did it take before you felt, and as you and I both know, you're never there, right? You're always constantly improving and moving forward, and we'll talk more about that with your organization. But when did you start feeling comfortable that the infrastructure that you and others obviously helped create was solid and was really churning along? How long did that take?
Well, I mean, in different respects, it took, it's a great question. It's a hard question to answer. It kind of depends. And I think about it in terms of, I guess, a few different things. I mean, there's when you start getting comfortable that this is a truly viable business, we're on solid ground, like, I feel good that we haven't gotten ahead of our skis with getting too big too quick, that sort of thing. And that's, I think really, like into the second year of our operation started to feel really good that, so I'll give you another example. I mean, just one of the things that you come to learn when you operate a venue like this, probably anywhere, but, particularly in Las Vegas, there's certain seasonality, right? So you know that, springtime is very, is great. And then, summertime, you get a little bit of a different audience. Things start to go, trail off a little bit into August into September before they pick up again. If you never operated before, that first September, you don't know if it's are we going down and gonna come back up again? Or are we just, so there's certain, now, like, again, you have, I wouldn't have gotten involved in this, and the people that this organization was surrounded by, I think virtually, assured us of being successful long term. But, you still don't know what you don't know, and you still have to go through it, right? And you have to experience it and feel solid. So I think there's the when did we start seeing that, get through that initial year and start seeing the kind of that upward trajectory, that attendance growth, the revenue growth, and that we're on a steady, chart upward. I think, another way of answering your question is also about level of quality. And, are we truly, we pride ourselves in being a world-class museum. And some of the things, early on in your development, the exhibits were always like, that we opened with were top notch, were great. Some of the early programs and events, there's learning in that, right?
Sure.
There's all the, making certain that all the technology runs smoothly, that when you do a program in the courtroom, that everything runs as it should. When you start, I think there's other reference points of, points in time where you start feeling like, now we are reliably hitting the mark with, this is truly world-class quality that we're presenting at and can feel good about. Another big milestone for us was when we got accreditation from the American Alliance of Museums. So that didn't happen. It took us 5 years to get there, and that sounds like a long time, but that's actually very fast for a new museum to get accredited in that amount of time. There's roughly 38,000 museums nationally. A bit more than 1,000 are accredited. I mean, it is a small percentage that go through that process. And it's pretty rigorous. I mean, they go and they pick through all of your, all of your plans, all your documents, make certain that you're, if you have a collection of artifacts, that you're adhering to the best practices in the industry. And when you get it, it's extremely validating that, again, we operate as well as any museum. And again, not to say that we can't be better in different ways, but we are at a high standard of professionalism. And for us, I think that was particularly important as a milestone to get to, especially given that, people don't necessarily expect that a place called the Mob Museum in Las Vegas is going to be a best-in-class, museum, in terms of its different, policies, procedures, and practices. So we wanted to make sure that we had that validation. And then I'd say that I think probably the last thing I'd say about it, Mike, is that just, at the end of the day, as much as, there's particular people that we want to make proud, and we want to have the stamp of approval from AAM, and we like getting different awards and such. At the end of the day, it's about, the experience that we deliver to the general public. And so we have always been careful about tracking guest, visitor feedback, the guest ratings, the guest comments. And when we were able to see that, this is, if we take the number one metric that we track, it's the scale of 1 to 10, your likelihood to recommend the museum to a friend or family member. That is among all the different metrics we track, that's the one we probably pay the most attention to, consistently over, 9, with, 10 being extremely likely, 1 being not likely at all. I mean, it's, the marks, the guest experience marks have been outstanding. And that's the most important thing for us. I mean, it's why we're here. Yeah.
I mean, number one, congratulations on that distinction, right? Of being one of the few museums in the country to have, that kind of accolade, that kind of stamp of approval, as it were. And that's huge. Something you said just about the question. So, having been there and seeing you and your team, the way they interact, you guys, obviously you have great rapport with your team, but, from, the person that's checking your band before you walk in to whomever, they all have this really great way of approaching customers or the customer experience. And then you harken back to mission, vision, values. How do you as a leader impart those values to your troops? And the reason I ask is I remember reading a book years ago by Jack Welch, remember the former chairman of GE. And when he took over, there were certain things he needed to accomplish. And he said, whatever the mission and vision statements were, he made sure that they heard it over and over and over again. So nobody could ever say that they didn't know what it was. That's one approach, right? So how do you approach this?
Yeah.
Because it means everything, right?
Well, I agree 100%, Mike, and I think that you come at it from a few different angles. One is, the reference points have to be all around us. So even if we're not saying it, like they have, I have, like core values and my mission, hanging up on the wall. They're out in the hallway. They got to be in places where you constantly are saying like that we're, truly referring to them, right? And that we use, that is part of the lexicon. So we have in our core values, I'm very proud of this, that we created core values that were really what we believe unique to us. I mean, they have a lot of underlying similarities to a lot of values in a lot of other organizations, but our values, bold thinking, which reflects how we came to be in the first place. It was a giant, like, big audacious idea. And, so much of what we do as an organization is trying to be true to that. Right. So so when we're having a creative session, we're brainstorming, we're thinking about things, sometimes we need to remind ourselves, are we being, is this bold thinking? Is this as good as we got? Or is this, should be, another core value, people driven? Like we care deeply about people, and it's, guests, coworkers, other contributors to the organization. We know that people that work here, you can't thrive if you don't feel safe and secure. Those are, like, again, we point to taking responsibility, one of our core values, right? So each of us owning our part. So if there's something that has gone awry, we start with ourselves, right? What's, like things are rarely only ever somebody else's or because of something else, right? So I think it's having the reference points, it's using it, it's not just reciting it, but it's using the words and using what the underlying meaning is part of your ongoing, your daily kind of discourse and decision-making process. I think it's also, a few things. One, I like to think that as we're selecting people in the organization, as part of that recruitment process, we talk about this, we signal in the position descriptions, the announcements, we talk about our culture. So one of the things that we point out is that this is an organization in which things are continuously evolving, and you have to be comfortable with change. Not everybody's comfortable with change. It doesn't make you, not a good professional. It doesn't mean that you're not a good, person or a good worker, but it might mean that this isn't the organization for you because, this is not a place where we only ever do things the way in which we used to do it. We're constantly experimenting and modifying. So some people thrive off of that. Some people are okay with it. Some people, it's really not the place for you. So part of it is about having those frank, honest conversations, talking about it during the screening process, but then also signaling to people immediately about what kind of organization this is. If you are a full-time employee, that we hire to this organization, we will give you a book as soon as you get hired. Now, we don't stand over you to make certain you read it, but this particular book, is a leadership book, and it's largely, it's about leadership, but it's also largely about, some other basic comments about empathy and about trying to see things from the perspective of others. And I think it's both what you can learn from that book, but even if you don't process all of the concepts within the book, it's, the act of me giving it to you also should tell you that this is the sort of thing we value. Like, we think that like process is as important as outcomes. How we treat one another, matters as much as what we're able to get done with one another. So I think it's setting those right signals. And then I think, the last thing that I would add to this that I think that comes to mind that is critically important. You got to model the way, right? So so we have to constantly remind ourselves as leaders in the organization, and I put myself, first and foremost in this regard. You can't expect people to do things or to behave a certain way or to buy into your goals and your expectations if you're not showing that you walk the walk, right? That you're not doing it that you're not doing it yourself. So that's critically important.
Yeah, no, I just love the way you got your mission and values statements all over the place as a visual, and how you model it and your team models it, and you could just tell. You could tell that there was a lot of work done by you and your team to foster, this atmosphere. I've seen, a lot of places where a mission and vision statement is there, but it's never reinforced, right? It's just a piece of paper, right? Which means absolutely nothing. So I think that's great. A couple more questions before we have to wrap up. You've got tremendous success in this position and in the Mob Museum, in the community. Can you think of a time in your career where you made a mistake of some sort and it really helped you learn and become a better leader afterwards?
Sure. I think so. Earlier in my career, I can think about numerous times where I did not communicate with others the way in which I should. Right. I might think I've
been there.
And I think part of this is about what we were just talking about a few minutes ago, just that the process is as important as the outcome. And I think that for me, there were points in time, earlier in my career where I might have had the right position. I might have had the right, my idea or my solution to a problem might have been the best on the table, but the way in which I delivered that was just not good. And it's not I mean, you gotta be a good person to work with, right? You can't be it doesn't matter if I know best, if I'm a jerk about it. I'm not gonna get people to align with me. I'm not gonna get people to want to work with me and want me to be successful, and I'm not gonna be successful. So I can certainly think of occasions where terrible delivery or headstrong, or just not open, and so those really important lessons.
Yeah. Communications is key. Thank you for sharing that. I've stumbled a few times myself, but you remember those things, so hopefully you get better, going forward. And speaking of going forward, I wanted to make sure that we had enough time to talk about, well, in the vein of continuous improvement, and et cetera, what are the future plans for the Mob Museum?
Oh, well, we have an array of things that we're contemplating. I mean, so we've had a great deal of success, and which have brought with them some good problems to have. I mean, the place gets we get crowded, and that gets challenging. I mean, it's there's no way to at some point you can try to figure out different ways to incentivize people to come at less busy times of the day, but at some point it's a historic building, it's not going to get any bigger, and you can only fit people in it. So we And there's so much more we can do. I mean, we've, so attendance is now over 400,000 people a year. We have events that are constantly, we do such a wonderful array of special programs. So if you look at our event calendar, there's public programs we do where we bring in speakers or have panel discussions, or we do film screenings, and we could do so many more of these, as well as private events. But all of these things crowd out different spaces within the existing museum. So we know that we need to get bigger, and we're going to have to identify a plan for expansion. Before we get there, we have been working on an event plaza. So we have an outdoor space that's going to be, I think, a wonderful kind of, it's modeled to be an outdoor urban park type environment adjacent to the museum. Be a lovely place for people to spend time, particularly in the evening, and that we'll be able to program as well. So there's physical expansion. There's also things that we're working on, digitally, that will help us. We get almost 3 million people a year visit our website. So aside from all the people that are coming here in person, we know that there's, craving for this content, from people that, maybe will not even be able to come to Las Vegas. So how do we better reach those folks? So we're working on a podcast of our own. Don't worry. No competition with the.
That's okay.
It's
a symbiotic relationship. So
yeah. So, but there's a lot that we can do in that vein, and we do a lot of other programs that run beneath, under the radar. We do a lot of educational outreach. Our educators go out to schools, and we'll give lessons on STEM topics, forensic science, for example. We'll talk about constitutional law or how Las Vegas came to be. And there's so much more that we can do that will be helpful for the immediate community. So big appetites. It's just a matter of figuring out what comes first.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier. A big hairy. I think I might have told you back at Microsoft we used to call it BHAG, right?
Yeah.
Big hairy audacious goal.
Jim Collins.
So, yeah. So it's great. I think this actually. I'm glad that we had this conversation, because I think your description of your walk, your leadership walk, your business journey, the history of the museum, what it is now, what it's going to be, but really, more importantly, just the values and the mission that you and your troops have. And I've observed it up close and personal. I have seen the way they react towards you, and with respect, and also with friendship. You can tell there's a bond there, and you can't fake that. That's something that's genuine. So kudos to you, but also kudos to your team. For being able to provide the community with this experience. I love the fact that you're planning on expanding through podcasts and other places to reach people who are not in this area. I think that's important. And I think that you are a really great example of what leaders should be. And so I'm not just saying it because we're friends, but it's the truth. And I've learned a lot actually myself in this podcast, that best practices as well. So that can take to some of the other endeavors I have. So really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy man. You got a lot of stuff going on. So thanks for taking the time.
Well, Mike, I appreciate it so much. And I could just say, I'm really lucky that I get opportunities like this. I get to stand out in front, and I get, when people say really nice things about the museum, I'm the one that gets to hear them and gets, a lot of credit gets thrown to me. But I think you hit the nail on the head. The team is incredible. The people that surround this organization, the staff that are here, the volunteers, the board, our advisors. I mean, it's that's what makes this place great.
Yeah, I agree. And we're going to have to schedule some time to get to the speakeasy.
Right on. Thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. You have a great day. And thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Well, thank you all of you for watching this edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. I think as you listen to Jonathan speak, you'll be able to glean a lot of nuggets. We went through a lot of different leadership areas, whether whether it's strategy or getting granular or mission and vision and how to treat people. I think that was the most important part. How do you treat people? So please give me your feedback. I love the feedback that you're giving me on the podcast. And stay tuned. We have some really great guests as well coming up in the future. So keep on with your Ronin leadership, and we'll talk to you soon.